water and clean energy. We're super excited to be having you guys today and to discuss climate change and the problems it can create for farmers, as well as solutions that we can call for as Iowans. Since its inception around 12,000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, agriculture has been a driving force behind the growth and prosperity of mankind. Although thousands of years have passed since then, farmers and farming continues to play pivotal roles in society on our food and security and general livelihood. Here today with us are 5 speakers: Silvia Secchi from the Department of Geographical and Sustainability Sciences at the University of Iowa, Mike Carberry from Iowa Farmers Union, Suzan Erem of Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, Jerry Eckerman, farmer, and John McAtee of Citizens Climate Lobby. Accompanying each speaker is a unique perspective on agriculture and climate change, but shared between them is a wealth of knowledge on how agriculture can be harnessed to help solve climate crisis rather than contributing to it. With that being said, here are let's introduce 4 of our panelists to get this thing going.
All right, so I think we first have Silvia Secchi. So I'm gonna mute Connor, and then Silvia, you should be good to share now.
Yes, I think I am. All right. Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I'm happy everybody is home safe and taking some time to think ahead about issues that are important to the state of Iowa, to one of our most important economic sectors, but are also really critical to the future of the planet. So what I thought I would do in this first introductory talk is give you a broad perspective of the special role that agriculture plays in regards to climate change. What do I mean by special? All the slides that I'm going to be showing you are slides that come from the IPCC reports, so they reflect the consensus of the scientific community. And as you can see in the red circle, agriculture is really important because it is both an emitter of greenhouse gases, so it is part of the problem, but it also suffers from the emissions of greenhouse gases. And so it is impacted and suffers from climate change. Agriculture is special because it is also part of the solution to climate change. And so thinking more broadly about what kind of things we can do to create a more resilient agricultural sector, while at the same time reducing climate change impacts and reducing our own emissions is really unique to the agricultural sector. So let me give you a couple of examples. You can see that agriculture is part of the problem in terms of, for example, our greenhouse gas emissions. And I picked livestock just because it had a colorful picture, but agriculture in many places is also a heavy user of fossil fuels for artificial fertilizers, for example. Agriculture will be impacted by climate change. You can see here that some crops are going to be impacted more than others. And this is a general chart. The scientific community consensus is that, for example, temperate zones like Iowa will be impacted much less than tropical zones. So when you think about crops like corn or maize, we are actually going to have a heavier lift, most likely, because our yields may not be affected, while yields in tropical areas where corn is an important staple food will be impacted. And so we may have to make up for those yield deficiencies. Agriculture is also part of the solution. Here in this chart, you can see biomass without carbon capture and storage and biomass with carbon capture and storage being important components for the supply of primary energy in the future. And this is true whether we have high energy demands or low energy demands. You know, in the climate arena, biomass with carbon capture and storage is kind of like the holy grail, because if we can, for example, burn switchgrass or burn crop residues and then take that CO2 emitted by the burning and store it underground, we are actually going to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's not carbon neutral, it's carbon positive. In terms of the range of solutions that agriculture and more broadly the food system has the potential to offer, it's important to think about whether we do more mitigation, that is, we actively reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, or more adaptation, that is, we go business as usual and we have to adapt to a climate that is becoming warmer. And you can see that in agriculture, there are many things that we can do that work both in a world where we reduce more aggressively greenhouse gas emissions and in a world where we don't do that. And I'm sure the audience also appreciates that a lot of these things have what we call co-benefits. Increasing soil organic matter is not just good for the reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's good for a bunch of other things like habitat provision, soil health, you know, a host of other environmental benefits. So crop management is one of the areas where we can do better. You can see that, for example, residue management, crop livestock systems are the kind of things that are good both to adapt and to mitigate impacts of climate change. Livestock management is also an important component of the solution here. Climate services, you know, that's the kind of thing that only works if we don't mitigate. We're going to have to adapt a lot in terms of floods and droughts if we don't do much mitigation. And then we have things like improved supply chain and demand management, which are broader food system response options that go beyond the farm gate. And my main message is that there are a host of policies that can be put in place here. We need a portfolio approach, so multiple things, because some of these approaches will work better in one place versus another. So it's not one size fits all for sure, but we need to engage with these discussions and think about what we want our resilient agriculture to look like. If there is no mitigation at the federal scale, what can agriculture as a sector do to adapt and provide co-benefits while ensuring that farmers have, you know, still make a living? There are a variety of options in places like Iowa where we have both crop and livestock production, and there are things that we can do in terms of the broader food sector. And I'm done.
Okay, so are there any questions for Dr. Secchi?
And to
Anyone in the audience?
ask questions, you would use the Q&A little button down at the bottom of your screen. We'll also have questions at the end if folks think of things. All right, I don't see any right now, so I think we can go to the next speaker.
Okay, great. Mike?
I think I'm muted.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, am I sharing my screen now?
You are.
Okay, it's how come it's not advancing? Why is that? It's new pause share. No. Okay, this is Mike Carberry, and I'm having a problem. There we go. Now it's working. So this is Mike Carberry. I'm with the Iowa Farmers Union. I'm a climate action specialist. I've been on the board of the Iowa Farmers Union for about since 2008. I grew up in a small farm town west of Cedar Rapids. My dad was a large animal vet, so I've been around agriculture for all my life. And I started working on climate change about 20 years ago. So now my screen isn't advancing. Why is that? I apologize. There we go. There we go. So let's assume it is facts. And thank you to the doctor for a nice presentation. And it's an honor for me to be here. But let's get right to the meat of the matter. And what I don't want to talk about here is whether climate change is real, or that climate change is from man-made causes, or we all know that climate disaster is here now, especially in Iowa, and farmers are taking a huge brunt of that disaster here in Iowa. We had $3 billion worth of farm damage here in the state of Iowa in 2019. About $2 billion of it came along the Missouri River flooding, and about $1 billion came from the Mississippi River flooding. And so climate disaster is deadly serious all over the world. It's there's been a lot of death and destruction, and very expensive. You know, the flood in Cedar Rapids in 2008 at the time was one of the 5 most expensive disasters in the world at that time, but has been eclipsed almost every year by other ones. And as we all know, we need to act on climate now. And so again, I'm having problem advancing the slides. I don't know why that is. Apologies. I don't know. There we go. Maybe I need to do something here differently. So the ag contribution for climate change is approximately 25%. The IPCC came out in their report in August and said the food sector ranges from 21 to 37% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's from soup to nuts. That is the planting, the growing, all the inputs that we have, especially energy intensive farming like we do here in Iowa. And then of course there's the harvesting, the transportation, the marketing, and even the rotting of food, which we waste about 1/3 of the food that's produced in this country is not eaten, and most of it then decomposes into methane. So agricultural related emissions primarily come in the form of methane and nitrous oxide due to the use of the synthetic fertilizers we just talked about, and the burning of crop residues is also a major factor. But agriculture can not only be the problem, agriculture can be the solution. And what that solution is that we need to go back to mostly the way that our grandfathers and great-grandfathers farmed this land. And that's a type of agriculture that we're calling these days regenerative agriculture. And it's a conservation and rehabilitation approach to food and farming systems. It focuses on the soil, the topsoil, and increasingly we want to talk about soil health. We need to stop, as Gabe Brown says, we need to stop treating our soil like dirt. And what we need also is increased biodiversity. This also helps improve the water cycle, supporting biosequestration of carbon. That's the sequestration of carbon, and that's what we want to do. We want to draw down carbon, and if we farm correctly, we can do that, and we can increase resilience to climate change by doing this regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture, like I said, is not new, and it can be done in your garden, and it can be done on small farms. And we have, a lot of us have heard of things like permaculture, agroecology. We have things like agroforestry and silvopasture, and I misspelled that. I'm sorry for the typo. Restoration ecology, key line design, and holistic management are ways that small farms and gardens can do some regenerative agriculture. But I mostly want to focus on what we call conventional agriculture. And that is what we do on medium to large farms. So some of the practices that we can use on medium to large farms include no-till or minimum tillage of the soil, using cover crops. And using cover crops, basically, leaves living matter on the soil as long as we possibly can, and that helps to build the organic matter. We can always also use buffer strips, prairie strips, and other sorts of things where we are basically not planting the entire field. And we want to leave, and this is really good for water filtration and also for soil erosion. So organic farming is another practice. We're putting less inputs. A lot of the inputs that were put on farms, whether that be fertilizer or nitrogen, pesticides, herbicides, are very intensive, also use a lot of energy, and especially fertilizer, like it is, putting straight nitrogen on things. So composting is another way that we can do regenerative agriculture. By leaving compost on the field, it holds moisture and also reduces the growth of weeds. Crop diversification is something that we really need to focus on. In this way that we've been farming in the last 40 years, we've been really focused in the Midwest on monoculture of 2 crops. That's corn and soybeans. When I grew up, most of the farmers had, say, about 5 different crops, including corn and beans, but they also had oats, alfalfa, hay, pasture. We've kind of eliminated that and just gone into a corn and bean rotation, and that's not good for the soil. So again, we talk about crop rotations, similar to diversification, but what you need to do is on a particular field, say you grow corn on it one year, beans on it the next year, then maybe you put it into pasture for a year or 2, and then maybe you can put it back into a crop, but maybe it doesn't have to be corn or beans. And then of course, there's grass-fed livestock. I know a lot of people, when they talk about farming and climate, says you have to go to a plant-based diet, but the integration of cattle and other livestock back onto the land actually helps sequester carbon. The large animals, especially, their hooves turn over the soil. When the livestock is on the pasture, they poop on the pasture. Then, of course, that starts to biodegrade. Their hooves then turn it over, and it really helps build soil health. So integrating livestock back on pasture is something that we need to talk about as we move forward, and getting those animals out of confinements. 95% of the meat, dairy, and eggs that we eat in this country are raised in confinements. So regenerative agriculture, this is from the Rodale Institute. It says we could sequester more than 100% of the current annual CO2 emissions with a switch to common and inexpensive organic management practices, which we term regenerative organic agriculture. And that's what I've been talking about here. So how do we get there? We can't get there overnight. It's going to have to be a transition. A lot of farmers will start maybe doing no-till on part of their farm, and then they'll do more and more of it as it goes on. And the same with cover crops. I know a lot of farmers that have maybe a quarter of their land in cover crops, and they're trying to get more and more. And one of the things that does is it lets you then transition, and you don't have to do it overnight. And it also, excuse me. So another thing you can do then, and what's most important as a consumer, is to vote with your fork and vote with your food dollars. By knowing your farmer, join a CSA, shop at places that actually buy from local farmers, like food co-ops and farmers markets. And I'm in this day and age, with us being in a COVID-19 confined world, farmers markets may be a little bit more difficult, but I believe you could find yourself a farmer and get a CSA share, and a lot of farmers will probably be delivering those food boxes on a weekly basis. So educate yourself and others is a really important thing. Learn about regenerative agriculture. Talk to your elected officials is really, really important, and that can be your county supervisors, your state elected representatives, but most of all, we need you to talk to your Congress folks. Your senators, Senator Ernst and Grassley in Iowa, are both on the Senate Ag Committee, and Senator or Congresswoman Cindy Axne is also on the House Ag Committee. The Farm Bill comes up every 5 years. Our budget, they always say your budget reflects your values. What the Farm Bill is really the farm budget. And what we need is more cost share and more support for regenerative agriculture. Right now, you can only get crop insurance basically on corn and beans. You can't get it on vegetables. You can't get it on organics. So we need the Farm Bill to reflect the values of regenerative agriculture. And by doing that, what we need to do is have a change in the way we fund farming. So that's really what I have today. If anybody have any questions, I gladly take them now. Or we could, if you don't want to give me questions now, here's my contact information.
Okay, Mike. So we got a question for you.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Connor.
From Mindy Auler is wondering, how will the virus impact the supply chain for planting?
How will the virus impact? Okay, let me see. The COVID-19 virus impact the supply chain. That's actually a pretty good question. I'm not a farmer myself, and I think we have a farmer coming up a little later. Supply chain, I assume they're talking about seed, or maybe are they talking about crops? I'm not quite sure, but I think we're going to have a lot of problems in all supply chains now because basically our economy is locked down. So I think farmers are going to have, if they haven't got their seed already, there's going to be some issues getting that. And I think there's going to be delays in farming this year. Some of them are weather related. We're already seeing some flooding along the Missouri, and they're predicting a lot of flooding along the Mississippi River. I saw the Iowa River. I was by it yesterday. It's very, very high. Our water table is very high. So there's going to be delays, weather-related delays and climate-related delays. But I also think that Mindy is right. We will probably see some delays because of the COVID-19. Other questions?
Okay, another question, Mike, from Josh. Thoughts on intercropping at the large farm level? Is it possible?
I believe so. I'm not an expert on intercropping. I think we have a farmer coming up later here. I'd like him maybe to talk about that. Since I don't farm myself, and I've really only been working on the regenerative ag here for a couple months, but that's actually a question that I don't feel an expert at answering at this time. Apologies.
Any other questions? Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to our third speaker, John McAtee from Citizens Climate Lobby.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to start talking. I'm not sure how exactly to access my slide deck, but now it's on there. And I'm looking at my presentation. And I'm actually going to go back up to the top and click on my first slide. And I think I'm ready to go here. Are you able to see my slide in full?
Right now, I just see you. I think if you hit share screen at the bottom.
That, I would love to do that. I guess to do that, I should go to Zoom again.
Mm-hmm.
I open a tab to Zoom.
Yes.
And by the way, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jerry Ackerman. He's a full-scale regenerative farmer. He's been practicing regenerative farming for over 20 years, lives in Southwest Minnesota. And he's on the line now. I'm clicking join a meeting, and this is odd that I have to rejoin somehow. Sorry for the delay, folks. open Zoom. Now I'm going to share screen, right?
Yes. All right, you're close. So we see the Zoom window. So you'll just, when you hit share screen, it should give you the option to share a window, and then you'll just need to pull,
Okay.
have it show your slide deck.
Sometimes there's a delay. Right now it says it's launching. And if, please click Open Zoom US if you see the system dialog. At the bottom, if nothing prompts from browser, click here.
So I think what you actually want to do is the one of the tabs open in Chrome, your slideshow.
There's no tab up there that, oh, well, I mean, I can go right to my slideshow,
Yeah, I think
which
that's,
is here.
yeah, do that and then hit present.
Ah, right, which is where I am now. Can you
Yeah.
see that?
Yes, you are perfect. You're good to go now.
Excellent. I'm really glad to hear that. So glad to be here with you all. I'm John McAtee. I'm a retired physician, a member of the Iowa City Climate Advocates, the local chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonpartisan, nonprofit climate advocacy organization, and we're focused on creating national policies to address climate change and making a more livable future for our children. Well, what brought me here today are our daughters. This is, by the way, a quick slide showing what we're doing. We've got 108,000 volunteers in the US, 471 chapters, a lot of lobby meetings in DC, regional speaking, letters, op-eds. And so our daughters really are the reason why I got involved in Citizens Climate Lobby. I really am concerned about climate change, and I want them to have a livable future in a thriving world. I also like to spend a lot of time outdoors. This is at Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm worried that we're not protecting our environment and not being good stewards of the earth. So what brought me here today also is the opportunity to meet and listen to people whose living is directly impacted by the weather and climate, especially farmers. You know, I'm a member of the Iowa Farm Bureau, but I'm not a farmer myself. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing from Jerry later. In this talk, we'll review the effects of the changing climate on Iowans, the science behind climate change, and why carbon pricing is the critical next step in keeping the world livable. So basically, a quick explanation for those who might need it. Panel, you're already on this, but just starting with an explanation of how greenhouse gases are changing the climate. When we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, we release excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And in our atmosphere, carbon dioxide acts like a heat-trapping blanket. And as we keep thickening this blanket, we're disrupting our natural systems. Then the sea levels rise as the water becomes warmer. And the biggest cause of global warming is CO2 emissions. And the Earth is getting warmer, and this warming of the atmosphere and oceans is causing more severe and unpredictable weather, which is causing a lot of damage to our Iowa farms and the livelihood of farmers. So farmers are facing the consequence of more severe weather patterns and more severe weather patterns, including flooding, drought, heat stress, and more infestations of insects. This is just a quick slide showing that the 20 warmest years ever on record have occurred during the past 22 years, which is pretty phenomenal. So, and I mentioned these are some of the consequences, unpredictable weather, flooding, drought, heat stress, and we're experiencing a lot of those in Iowa. Decreasing crop yields is a real big concern for the future. And here's a photo of the 1,000-year flood in the Quad Cities in 2019. These major floods used to happen every 1,000 years, and now they're more frequent. And this is causing people to change their minds about climate change. And they're beginning to connect the dots and recognize that climate change is now causing more severe weather patterns. So a massive shift in public attitude about climate change is occurring. More and more people, including Iowa farmers, are aware of and concerned that climate change is driving major shifts in weather patterns. So the fact that people are talking a lot more about climate change, it's a really good thing that just we need to be talking about it with our families and friends and people we need. And the majority of Americans and Iowans now believe that climate change is real. Great quote here: the reason for this shift in public attitude is that Mother Nature is that Mother Nature is now the most trusted messenger on climate. And as farmers out in the audience, you know that weather is really all important. It's your friend or your enemy. And the problem is weather has become less predictable and more severe. Often we don't know what to do about it. Fortunately, we have the tools we need to reduce our use of fossil fuels and bring balance back to our natural systems. So basically, I'm here to tell you about a really effective thing you can do about it. And we need your help to pass a bipartisan climate solution bill that was just introduced in Congress, which is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And it's effective, good for people, good for the economy, bipartisan, and revenue neutral. Now, it's effective because it'll drive down carbon emissions by at least 40% over the next 12 years, which is really huge. It's beneficial because it will pay an annual dividend up to $4,410 for a family in year 10. And get to the next slide. Yeah, it'll save 295,000 lives through 2030 because of better air quality. It's bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans are both co-sponsoring this bill, about 80 co-sponsors in the House right now. And finally, the bill is revenue neutral, means it doesn't grow government and doesn't raise taxes. Basically, how it works, just to mention, it's supported by economists. Economists agree that the most effective way to lower carbon emissions is carbon pricing. Basically, how does it work? The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act will put a price on fossil fuels and return all of that money as a carbon dividend to citizens as a monthly check. It's revenue neutral, meaning it will not grow government or raise taxes, which is essential to get broad support across the spectrum. In order to get liberals and conservatives to be supporting it, it has to be revenue neutral. It doesn't grow government or raise taxes. The other really important point to make is here, it's equitable to poor people because this monthly carbon dividend check will more than offset the slowly rising price of gas and other fossil fuels due to the carbon fee. And wanted to go to the next slide. This is a quick, this is business as usual, CO2 by the time we get to 2050. This is the CO2 reduction, if it's introduced, that will bring us down 90% by 2050. And this is comparing to, if I can get there, right. This is showing that we're pretty comparable. It's going to get us into the range of the IPCC recommendations. And if this will fill in quickly, okay, there's the Paris Climate Accord. And as it says, under the Paris Agreement, the target for US emissions reductions closely parallels the Energy Innovation Act. However, the EIA keeps going beyond 2025, whereas Paris does not set any later targets. I can answer questions. So big thing we're here about, and what do we want to know about? How does this Energy Innovation Act affect agriculture? So the bottom line is that this puts a steadily rising fee on fossil fuels that would effectively reduce CO2 emissions, and that will directly benefit farms and farmers and help protect them from the economic and environmental impacts of climate change. Gradually increasing the cost of fossil fuels will also spur technology that leads to more fuel-efficient vehicles and develops more sustainable biofuels and bioenergy from residues, energy crops, and agroforestry. This carbon fee and dividend bill will move farmers more quickly to sustainable agricultural practices that are less carbon intensive, use more green renewable energy sources, and reduce their need for fertilizer. Farmers who prioritize regeneration of carbon-enriched soil, which is the way Jerry, who's going to be speaking, has been doing for 20 years, will assist this process, require less fossil fuel, and increase soil fertility and resilience to floods and droughts. That's what farmers want to do. They want to restore the earth. We've just got to make it cost-effective for them. But won't this hurt farmers by raising the cost? This is the first question. Won't it raise the cost of fuel and energy-intensive fertilizers? Fuel used on farms, especially diesel fuel for tractors and other equipment, will be exempt from the carbon fee. That's an exemption in the Energy Innovation Act, that there is an exemption for red diesel used on farms. But it's absolutely the case that that wouldn't be enough. Separate legislation would be needed to provide short-term compensation to farmers to prevent economic stress. So that is a real concern, and it's a valid concern. In the longer term, carbon pricing will encourage farmers to more quickly shift to sustainable agricultural practices that regenerate the soil, increase yields, eliminate nitrogen runoff, and do not rely on fertilizer like no-till farming, cover crops, and crop rotation. So this policy will also help advance more sustainable biofuels and bioenergy from residues, energy crops, and agroforestry that Mike talked about. So just wanted to get toward the end here. So what can we do? What's your action plan? And we were asking people what would they, how would they like to get involved? People are really concerned, but they don't know what to do. And we're asking folks to, if they're interested, get involved with Citizens Climate Lobby and help get this bill passed. Because as soon as it's passed, we're going to very quickly go to lowering carbon emissions 40% in 12 years. But that absolutely isn't going to get us there the whole way. We've got to have sustainable agriculture and refrigerants and methane. All of those have got to be reduced. Everything, we've got to do everything, including and the farmers and ranchers and foresters are going to be our heroes. They're going to be the ones that are going to really go the longest way, or a huge way, toward stopping climate change. So if you want to get more information about CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, there's an info session every week. You can go to the energyinnovationact.org website, or just Citizens Climate Lobby. Here's some great quotes I just want to share with you. The reason for this shift in public attitude about climate change is that Mother Nature is now the most trusted messenger on climate. CCL taught me to see the best in others, even in those who oppose me. To imagine a better world is to make one possible. It always seems impossible until it's done. And so I really appreciate getting the chance to talk to you all. And this is our plan. And if anybody has any questions for me, we've got a few minutes.
Awesome, John. So we do have a question for you.
Go ahead.
How can someone go about supporting this bill, and are there local groups in Iowa?
I'm really glad you asked that. The local chapter is Iowa City Climate Advocates, and you can just go online, search Iowa City Climate Advocates. You'll get right to their website. It lists our monthly meetings, which are the second Saturday of each month, 12 o'clock at the Prairie Hill Co-Housing Community House. And we've been getting 25, 35 people every week, and we've had amazing speakers, candidates for Senate, Teresa Greenfield. We've had Dave Loebsack, representatives from Moxie Solar. We just got Moxie solar system on our house. We're getting a couple of EV plug-in hybrids that will be powered by that. So we're really excited about this, and we're getting a huge, I think 26% rebate from federal. Anyway, that's an aside. I want to make room for Jerry coming up, but anyway, that's our local chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. And just to mention that we've had people from Moxie come to speak to our group, and Verve, they're also part of Moxie, and they're now selling EV cars. And that's it. Any other questions?
John. Awesome, John. So I don't see any other. Oh, here's another question. Yeah, Gina will be. Okay, but with that being said, we can move on to our fourth presenter, Suzan from SILT.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I need John to stop sharing his screen so that I can then share mine. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. I think, nope, still there. John, you need to go up to the top and stop sharing your screen. The top of Zoom. Okay, while he figures that out, I'll get started talking, folks. How's that? Okay, there we go. So I just want to share some pretty pictures with you guys while I'm talking, and fill you in a little bit on SILT and kind of summarize these great presentations we had just a touch. I just want to say it's really wonderful to see such a variety of speakers. Looking forward to an on-the-ground farmer responding to everything he's heard tonight. The Sustainable Iowa Land Trust was launched in 2015 by 25 people, and many of them farmers, such as Denise O'Brien, Fred Kirschman, and others. And we were formed because there was a variety of problems that were coming to the rise once again in Iowa. And most of us had been through the farm crisis of the 80s, and we were seeing a new farm crisis developing now. First, because land had quadrupled in 20 years. So the next generation of farmers were not going to be able to grow to purchase land and gain access to land. We also saw that Iowa's ranking in childhood obesity was going through the roof, that our diversity had disappeared on our landscape, and that, of course, our water and our air are terribly polluted. And so the solution to that over a couple of years of research was to develop a land trust. A land trust is a special kind of nonprofit that is the only kind of nonprofit that can make a forever promise. We can actually enforce restrictions on land for the next 7 generations, or as long as our US government is in place. And we also take land donations. And in SILT's case, we restrict all use to sustainable food farming. And in Iowa, those are all loaded terms. So let me say truly sustainable in terms of never taking more energy off the farm than we put into it, and vice versa. And when we say food, we're talking about table food, fruits, nuts, vegetables, and pastured meat and poultry and pork. And when we're talking about protecting it, we mean restricting the land use. So this is all voluntary. It's only landowners who are interested in doing it who step forward, and that's just fine. But when it happens and when we're done, we have a vision of permanent food farms surrounding all of our growing communities, feeding our local people fresh, wholesome food. With any luck, we'll never be able to grow oranges and limes in Iowa, but we can certainly grow a lot more food than we're growing now. Iowa farms used to average 34 crops. They now average 2. So in terms of climate, the kind of farming that we are promoting and that we require on our farms is the kind of farming that sequesters carbon and protects soil. This picture you're seeing now is a chestnut orchard in Winfield, Iowa. We also support economic sustainability. That orchard happens to make $7,000 per acre every year. So it gives you some example of economic sustainability. And we don't try to convince farmers who've been doing the same thing for 30 or 40 years to change, and we certainly don't want to judge them. But we do want to take the opportunity of this massive transfer of wealth that's happening right now in Iowa and around the country to talk to those farmers who are aging out and those landowners who can see the end of their days and say, what kind of legacy would you like to leave the next generation? Because we know the next generation is going to do it differently. And in SILT's case, we know an entire generation of people who actually want to grow food in a healthy, nature-friendly way, and they actually want to interact with their customers, direct-to-consumer sales, and that sort of thing. By lower or the board is still kicking, not for the next 20 or 30 years, but for the next 7 generations or longer. So when we look at the policy changes that need to happen, like John described, they are so crucial. They're so much a part of the toolbox. When we look at what the kind of work that Mike is doing, again, a really crucial part of what's going to make change on this globe. And Silvia, without your ability to kind of crunch the numbers for us and make those reports something that we might actually understand, nobody's ever they're all gonna zone out before they get to what can we do. And so all of these are elements to making the change. But I want to recognize that farming is a for-profit endeavor, and we cannot ask our farmers to launch into ways of growing what they're growing unless we have that bridge for them to get from here to there. Regenerative farming, I mean, I'm growing over 400 perennial plants on my place, everything from heart nuts to Asian pears to honeyberries and, believe it or not, gooseberry cultivars. And, if I didn't have a day job or a husband with Social Security, we all would have starved. So we have to recognize that regenerative agriculture and new systems require investments. There's a very high risk as far as farmers are concerned, and very low benefits because they're waiting to see their neighbors do it and they haven't seen the benefits yet. They're still out there. They're very abstract to many people. Most of the corn and bean farmers I've spoke to still think of climate change as just weather, and they see it as a trend that's going to end in 4 or 5 years, and then all the weather will be back to the way it used to be. And I think most of the folks on this panel understand that in 4 or 5, we wait 4 or 5 years to prove them wrong. We are way too late to make any change. So, so that's our contribution. SILT's contribution is to say, what can we do to make the work that we're doing permanent? And to acknowledge that this is a very complicated issue, and that all farmers are not the same, and that we have to go at it with the appreciation of how complicated it is. That's all I've got to say. Thank you. I'd be glad to take questions.
Any questions for Susan? Okay, well, looks like we can move forward with our farmer, Jerry, and have him share some insights on sustainable agriculture in the present day. So Jerry, if you want to go ahead.
Hello, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid this is a case of mistaken identity. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I believe you really want to be talking to Jerry Ackerman, who I thought was supposed to be one of the participants. I am not Ackerman. I am Fottrell. I am just a small farmer and orchardist primarily in Johnson County. and I'd be happy to share my insights about orcharding with you, but I don't think that's what you really wanted to hear.
Okay.
No,
There's
hang on.
Jerry Ackerman.
Jerry?
Hello.
Hey, Jerry, how's it going?
Well, I'm on the phone here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're live. We were just wondering, would you like to share some insights with our audience on sustainable agriculture in the present day?
Well, I guess I'm at a loss. I don't have a slideshow or anything at that.
No problem.
And right now I'm looking at a screen that said the host has asked you to start your video. I don't have one. So, yes, I do farm. We have 1,200 acres. I and my wife Nancy farm here in Jackson County, which is about 10 miles north of Iowa. And I did talk with John this afternoon. And I guess, I don't know if you can say we're trailblazers or somebody everybody talks about in the neighborhood. Actually, we've been doing what we call strip till and no till for over 20 years. I don't know if everyone is aware of what strip till is. It's a machine that just tills a strip where the row of corn or soybeans go. We do no till all of our soybeans. And we've been strip tilling for 20 years. And along with that, we farm 1,200 acres, of course, but we're 1/3 corn, 1/3 soybeans, and 1/3 alfalfa as a cash crop. And that's been kind of tough on us the last couple of years. We've lost a lot of our alfalfa acres in both 2018 and 19. We started cover crops probably 12 years ago, 14, I'm not sure, experimenting. And we now have every acre covered with a cover crop. Of course, alfalfa is a continuous cover. We do interseed our corn when it's very small, about 6 or 8 inches tall. And as I was telling John, we've even learned now, we've cut considerably amount of our fertilizer after doing this for several years, regenerating soil. And we actually on our corn the last 2 years, we terminate one cover crop after we've planted our corn, and that gives us about 30 days where it's weed free. And in that time, we will interseed another cover crop, which also helps cover the soil. And we've actually seen yield gains by doing that. In fact, I was telling John that I just read a study by Ohio State where they did 3 years of study, and by interseeding, they were gaining 10 to 12 bushels per acre of corn from doing that. There's a lot of things involved, and I commend Iowa Citizens Climate Lobby. I think you're doing a very good job. The things I can tell you, I've learned on my own, plus I've studied a lot along the way, attended seminars across there, and actually presented at seminars at the National No-Till Conference and National Strip Till Conference. And I know my wife Nancy said, we're supposed to talk 4 or 5 minutes, so you'll have to tell me when you want me to shut off. We continually have a living root in the soil 365 days a year, or as close to it as we can. And I heard someone mention Gabe Brown, and I do know Gabe very well. If you hear him talk, he's going to talk about keeping armor on the soil. And that's keeping a cover so the soil is completely covered year round. Now, we've done a lot of studies on our own and with the University of Minnesota and with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. In fact, we're finishing up a 3-year study at this time, and it's on soil temperature and water infiltration. And it's amazing what we've seen over the years that's happened. In fact, we've found that with a living cover, our soils are 2 to 4 degrees warmer than bare soil in the spring. As Dr. Shannon Brown with the Agricultural Research Service out of Sioux Falls, or out of Brookings, explained to me about 8 or 9 years ago, in early spring, you have a living plant growing, and that absorbs the sunlight, which is heat, which goes down to its roots. And that's currently what we're seeing on this last 3-year study. We're always warmer in the spring, and we're able to actually go into our fields to plant probably 3 to 4 days earlier than someone with conventional tillage. Now, you'll have to excuse me. I mean, I was the guy that had the big 4-wheel drive tractor, the 50-foot field cultivator, and a 12-bottom plow. And how I got started, a friend of ours who was our local cooperative bought a strip till machine, and he actually thought, you know, I've got to tell the patrons of this co-op that this is a good thing. So he took 80 acres, it was conventional tillage, and he planted half of that 80 normally like he normally does. He spread his fertilizer in the fall, he did his chisel plowing, he worked it with a field cultivator in the spring, and the other half, he did the strip till, which put the fertilizer directly below the row. And he said, I gained 10 bushel an acre. Well, being someone who's got very narrow profit margins, anybody looks for an edge. And 10 bushel an acre is something to really think about. So I tried it, and he was right. And I actually did it for 3 years, comparisons, and boom, we switched. That's it. And then we also went to no-till soybeans. Now, I've talked to many people over the years, and I do presentations around the country. It's very hard to get a farmer to change. I mean, if it works, don't break it, and so on and so forth. But everybody's running on such a slim profit margin, they have to look for any edge they can. Now, I hear people say we should diversify, and I agree. I have diversified with alfalfa. I've also thought we have grown wheat before, but it's very tough in our area because local elevators really don't want to buy it. If they will buy it, it's at such a discount, it really doesn't pay. And when I was doing wheat, we actually hauled it up to Shakopee, Minnesota at the river terminals to get a price. Well, that's good, but I can only haul 1 load a day unless you want to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to get 2 loads a day. And it's an extra expense. And I know Gabe Brown says, diversify your crops. We have to have a market for that crop. And wheat and oats are not real profitable. Now, I am going back to possibly adding wheat or oats into my rotation to have a 4th crop so that I can plant a cover crop, which will produce the nitrogen I need the following year for the corn. You know, I've done this long enough and tried enough things that it's fun. I'm actually having more fun in my life than I've ever had. And I keep learning things along the way. I do know there are people in Iowa and Minnesota that are doing the cover crops. The one thing that dismays me a little bit is the NRCS has good programs, and I tell people use them. They have the EQIP program, which encourages farmers to try covers and try new things, and they will pay to do that. That's one way to get farmers to change. The other thing that I really like that got more people in my area was the conservation stewardship program. Now, of course, they changed this program over the years, and it's getting a little harder to qualify. The payments not so much, but I've noticed more farmers have switched to doing the cover crops and less tillage, which are good for our soil. And it was because of that. And I don't know, I guess I'm open to questions if anyone has one. And I know John has said he wanted to come up and see it. I said, come on up. We do this continually. Every spring, all through summer, people come and we take them around our fields, but I won't just take them to our fields. I'll recommend they talk to this person or that person who has switched some things around. And not every farmer is going to do it the same every time. One person might like the interseeding. One person might like fall seeding. I know we typically fly on winter rye onto our soybeans when we get about 20% leaf drop. And we found that we can actually help with harvest. We were extremely wet in both 2018 and 19. And I know one of the guys that comes to help us actually parks his camper and he's there every weekend, said you don't have to pay me. And of course, last fall, it was kind of comical because I had back surgery, so I had a little extra help and probably wasn't doing as much as everyone else. And I watched him and he had his cell phone up there and I thought, what is he doing? And a semi was driving out of our field. And then pretty soon he was standing on the road watching the semi go down the road. And I come back and I said, what are you doing? Well, he said, you know, I run this repair shop and we had a lot of farmers come in to have hoses repaired and tires changed on trucks and trailers and everything. And he said, I told him you should do like that farmer I've been helping. He said, he's driving all his trucks out of the field and there's no mud on the road. They didn't believe him. He said, the next guy that comes in, I'm going to show him this video. It actually works. And I've actually been able to combine all of our acres in both 2018 and 19 where I watch a lot of people have standing crops in the field that it's too wet, they can't go through. By having that cover crop in there and them roots in the soil, it's just like having rebar in your soil. It'll carry that heavy equipment without compaction. So I thank you, and if you have questions, I'm open to that. I'll listen in for a while if anybody has questions.
Yeah, Jerry, so we have a couple for you. So one of the
Okay.
first questions is, what hard data can we use to show the benefit of no-till and strip-till in response to torrential rains or other environmental hazards?
It's out there. People sometimes don't know where to look for it. One of my biggest sources has been a publication called No-Till Farmer. And of course, a lot of farmers will not even look at it if they're conventional because they say, well, we're no-till. But a lot of their stories and everything are on cover crops and regenerating soil. And I continually have people come to us, and it's amazing because what I started 20 years ago, we also sell cover crops for lacrosse seed, which I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not. They actually came to me and they said, you've done more research and more studies and everything. We want you to be a representative, and that's fine. I do not advertise or anything. It's word of mouth. But we also try and help the people that come to us because it's new to them and I don't want to see them fail. So we keep a list of applicators in our area, and currently we have 21 strip till machines. We have 12 what I call interseeders, where they go in when the corn is small to seed another cover crop into it. We have 4 high clearance applicators that go in with drop tubes and put it into the corn and seed it before harvest. And we have 2 good pilots that work for us. So we tell them, get in touch with this person. And we have a lot of farmers that build their own equipment too.
Awesome. Okay, here's another question for you. Is using Roundup to terminate your pre-corn planting cover crop? Or are you using Roundup to terminate your pre-corn planting cover crop, or is it grain rye or something else?
This is winter rye. There's 2 types of rye. There's cereal rye and the other rye, which is spring rye. Cereal rye is like winter wheat. It goes, you put it in the fall, it'll go dormant. It is such a tough crop that I always say people can throw it out there and spit at it and it'll grow. Now, we've done different demonstrations for our watershed. I remember back in 2012, they had us actually seed half of a field, and we're actually using the cover crop to mitigate this weather, because I've got to put up with the weather, and I realize it is changing. In that year, 2012, we were in a drought, and we seeded it and had a field day, and there were maybe 20 people here, and there was really nothing hardly to see. Once in a while, you'd see a few sprigs and here and there. But we learned something, because in 2013 was like 2019. It started raining and it never quit. And it was so wet, I had to mud in that field. I actually had a few acres of prevented plant that year. And I wasn't able to get in and terminate the cover crop. And of course, I remember this because I remember the Farmer magazine was out and knew we were doing some cover crops and wanted to see it, and wrote in a combine. And the one thing I really noticed was where we didn't have the cover crop, we had all kinds of water hemp growing. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to put up an app on my soybeans next year. But where we had the cover crop, we had no weeds. And I commented, we're going to be using this for weed control. And as it turned out, when I harvested, we got to that point, and one of the drivers for one of our semis came in and jumped in the combine. And what do you think? And I was showing the weeds, no weeds, and it was right where the line was. And the next round it was going, you notice too much. And I said, that's amazing. And he said, well, I don't know about that, but he said, you ought to look at your yield monitor. It just jumped 20 to 25 bushel an acre. And I thought, what in the world is going on? I still use that yield map when I talk to audiences because I couldn't figure out what happened. And finally, by the time I got done with the field, I realized that the only thing different was the cover crop. We weren't able to terminate it, but that cover crop sucked up a lot of moisture. So one half of the field was growing corn, but it was almost drowning, where the other half had pulled down the moisture and got it going a lot better. And in that case, it gained us 20 bushel an acre. I've never had a yield loss using cover crops, always a gain. Now, sometimes it's not very large, but it's always a gain. And I know when we started the interseeding several years ago, Ray Archuleta, who was in NRCS service at that time, and he came out and helped us, and we had a field day. We actually gained 5 bushel an acre. So we found ways, and that goes back to keeping the soil covered. If it's really dry, you want to terminate that cover crop early to keep that ground covered to stop evaporation. If it's really wet, we let it grow well and suck up that extra moisture. In fact, we probably wouldn't have got the acres planted last year if we wouldn't have had the cover crop to carry our equipment through the fields. As far as terminating, yes, I do use Roundup. I know that gets to be a touchy subject. There are other things. We're also experimenting this coming year with crimping. Now, we're far enough north in the atmosphere that our cover crop doesn't get large enough because your stalk on your winter rye has to get hollow, so when it crimps, it dies. But we discovered I'm always doing tournaments, some of them accidental. Last year we had a field that was going to be corn, and because we lost so much alfalfa, we had more corn, so we decided to go to soybeans. And it never got sprayed, and didn't realize it. I had given the maps to the local cooperative, and of course we put up our first alfalfa crop, and Nancy out driving checking crops. She said, "I don't think that died." And I thought, really? I said, well, it's kind of changing color. Well, she went home. When we got home checking the spray tickets, she said that field never got sprayed. And by this time, the soybeans are probably 5 or 6 inches tall. And it turned out to be an accidental experiment that I'm going to try some things this year. Rick Clark, who happened to be on a 90 cover crop tour, I listened to him, and he's in Indiana, and he's farming 7,000 acres. And he's all organic, but he's using cover crops for his weed control and management. And he's letting the soybeans get up to the second trifoliate and then rolling it, which doesn't sound like it's healthy for the plant. It actually roughs up the plant. But then the plant actually creates its nodes closer and sets more soybeans. So I do have a 40-foot coil tine roller, and I'm actually going to experiment with that, plant the soybeans this year, let them come out, and then crimp the rod and see if that will do it. That would eliminate more pesticides putting on. Currently, we do terminate our cover crop after we plant corn, and then we have about 30 days weed-free where we interseed again, so that's our only herbicide. I just completed my licensing for pesticide application, which was on by extension, and I was a little shocked because they're telling farmers when they were getting their license renewal and going through the classes to use 2 types of pre-emerge herbicide and 2 different types of post-emergent herbicide. And I thought, man, you're talking $40 to $50 an acre what you're recommending, and it's not working. We've been able to do it now with minimal, and we're trying to get less yet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that should be great. Great, Jerry. So now let's go ahead and transition to the open discussion, where open discussion can take place between the audience and the panelists, or between panelists.
All right, so we've got a couple questions that I think would be helpful to hear the answers from a couple different panelists. So we've got 3 here. So if Connor, if you could read those, and then I'm gonna show our panelists on the screen, and folks can answer as they think is appropriate, or as they have an answer. So I'm looking at the bottom 3 questions in the Q&A.
Awesome. Okay, so the first question is, what resources do you suggest for farming environmental subsidies in Iowa? Are there grants and tax breaks available for these subsidies?
What?
So any of the panelists that have an answer to that can go ahead and unmute themselves and answer.
Well, this is Mike with the Farmers Union. I'd check with your NRCS, your local NRCS representative, and they always know what's available in your area. And they can talk to you about EQIP, other conservation programs that are available. Jerry might actually have a better idea since he actually farms, or Susan.
Yeah, and I do recommend anybody trying cover crops to check with an NRCS. They're very good programs. A lot of farmers are, how would you say it, scared to get involved because they don't want to be told what to do. But I always explain to them, most of them are 3-year programs. And the reason for that is you'll see a little bit of difference after the first year of cover crop. The second year, you'll see more. But the third year is really when it kicks in. And I always tell people, look, if the government's giving you money to do that, and it is enough to cover your cover crop and also terminate it, you know, you have to kind of play by the rules. And CSP is much better, I think, because it locks farmers in for 5 years. But that changes over the time, and the payments get down, and then people are scared to try it because it is a risk for them. It's scary. In fact, I was telling John this afternoon that I was so set on strip till. I've been doing this for 20 years. I actually had a couple of customers telling me they're switching from strip till to no-till because after 4 or 5 years of cover crops, their soil has changed. And I had it in my head that fertilizer had to go below that strip. I wanted a 10 bushel gain. And I said, yeah, we did that too, but now we've found after the cover crops for 4 or 5 years, they don't know what's happening. Is it the corn roots going out further? Is the cover crops mineralizing more nutrients? But they're not seeing any yield loss by going plant into it.
I'd like to add that in Iowa, at least, there are public federal funds for silvopasture and alley cropping. A lot of the things that Silvia showed on her slides about things that'll mitigate climate change, including agroforestry, there's funding for all of that. It may not be enough to, you know, feed the family and send the kids to college, but it can take the edge off of trying something new and different. There's also funding for transition to organic. They'll pay not only 90% of the organic certification expense, but also subsidize your transition to organic since it takes 3 years. So there's a lot of funding available for people who want to try something new and different. And I'm with Jerry. The cover crop mantra is a good one. It's not getting to enough farmers yet. It's people like him. Like I said, farmers like to check out their neighbors to see if it's working first. And he's obviously one of the best ambassadors for that because and proof that he checked it out with his neighbor first. But it is risky business, and we have to do what we can to encourage these farmers to change the way they're doing things as much as all of us have to change the way we're doing things.
Yeah, and farming is a business. This is Mike again with the Farmers Union, and most of the farmers that I've talked to within the Farmers Union that are using these techniques, especially cover crops and no-till, they're actually making more money than the farmers across the fence that aren't doing that because they have higher yields and lower input costs. And so, you know, when you're putting less into it and you're getting more out of it, it's just pure straight economics. And so that
I would like to add to this conversation that it is imperative that we think more broadly about the next farm bill. Yes, there are a lot of programs, conservation programs in place, but most of the money in the farm bill that goes to farmer does not go to conservation friendly programs.
Oh, absolutely.
And for example, reducing or increasing the number of crops that can receive crop insurance or tying crop insurance subsidies to environmental performance, like it's being done in other parts of the world. This is not stuff that, you know, it's out of the normal. You know, in other places they're doing it, changing the way the farm bill money is allocated to favor these kind of activities that have both other environmental benefits and climate change adaptation and mitigation benefits is critical. Just say, you know, there's these things here doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking more broadly about how we can make more of these things available to our farmers.
Right. Sylvia, I'd like to add to that. The most recent farm bill, and perhaps the one before that, provided for whole farm insurance, for example, which really supports diversified vegetable farming. We can't find barely an insurance agent in the state that will sell it. And so even though it looks good in the Farm Bill, most farmers growing vegetables can't even tap it. I do want to speak one more thing to the question, the person who asked the question about tax incentives. There are pretty significant conservation tax incentives for permanently protecting your land for conservation, which SILT does, but also other land trusts in Iowa and the country do. A 20-year tax credit in Iowa up to the loss of value. It's a 50% tax credit. For every dollar you lose, you get 50 cents in a credit, not in a deduction. And at the federal level, there's a 16-year deduction. That's a 100% deduction of your adjusted gross income for farmers, and a 50% deduction of your adjusted gross income for non-farming landowners if you protect your land. You can lose as much as 30 or 40% of the value of your land by permanently restricting it. And that dollar figure is what you take to the CPA and say, here's what I donated and how many years can I get the benefit. So, you know, we can thank the land trust community around the country for helping create at least that much policy that encourages people to protect their land for conservation, which includes nature-friendly food farming.
Great.
I think we have some other questions too.
Well, I just wanted to talk about, Silvia mentioned the Farm Bill. I spend about half of my time talking to farmers and consumers as well, trying to get feeders and eaters together to talk to our congressmen about the Farm Bill and to put in there those subsidies and whatnot for conservation practices. And if we can, if we continue to just subsidize the insurance for corn and beans and CAFOs, then that's what, if you subsidize bad things, and that's what you get. So we need to ask to put the good things in the Farm Bill that will bring more regenerative ag. Now, let me give you an example. You can get you have a CAFO and you can get a loan on that. You can get a guaranteed loan out of the EQIP program, out of the Farm Bill. But say you want to put livestock back on your pasture, and most of Iowa has taken out the fences so they can make the rows longer and get it more yield per acre. Well, perimeter fencing is very expensive. Well, you cannot get money out of the EQIP program to put fences back in. So that's just one small thing that could be put back into the Farm Bill, so we could reintegrate livestock back onto pasture and get them out of these hog and other confinements. It's industrialized agriculture is one of the things that's destroying the land and destroying the environment.
Great, thanks, Mike. Yeah. So we got time for a couple more questions. Here's another one. So would there possibly be any advantages besides carbon sequestration provided by planting trees in the ditches along all roads at the perimeter of farm fields?
Well, I'm not sure about ditches, but I think, especially when Mike references the Farm Bill, right now it's not possible to use CRP to plant trees and bushes that produce food because the government doesn't want you double dipping by harvesting the fruit and nuts off of the plants. But if you wait the 10 or 15 years until the program is over, you should be able to harvest those. I think that's a stacked benefit that we need to fight for. So yes, there is a benefit if you plant at least food producing bushes and trees.
I had a follow-up question to Jerry. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So earlier he was telling me about how it's really dollar and cents that reaches that farmers pay most attention to. You know, they can move toward, they're interested in going toward regenerative agriculture and especially regenerating their soil, but they can't do it if it doesn't make sense financially. And, you know, I've heard you say that I think when you work with cover crops, you can increase your return $100 per acre for beans and $57 an acre for corn. So why aren't more farmers rushing to use cover crops? And why isn't the Iowa Farm Bureau encouraging it more? It seems like that would just take off. I know they're, you know, stuck in habits, but.
that's probably the biggest thing is they're stuck in habits. And I do this whenever I do speaking engagement. I use Iowa custom rates, which all of Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wisconsin all use them rates. And that's when people start really listening, especially when you had $7 corn and $12 soybeans. It was a no-brainer. You just produce as much as you can. But now when margins are tighter yet, people are looking for where they can get the best return on their money. And I've actually had some bankers say that we want those figures. We want to show this to farmers. You know, that's why I did it. I guess, I don't know, you can call me cheap or greedy, whatever you want to call it. I want the most return on my investment. Now that doesn't always mean that I'm going to have 250 bushel corn, but our goal is steady 200 bushel corn with less inputs.
And it's just baffling why we're not going faster toward that.
I agree. It seems like it takes one person to change and then another person will change. And I know I was just to a meeting up by north of Rogers, Minnesota on soil health. And of course, that was quite well attended. And one of the people there, I'm actually a member of the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. I'm called a mentor because I said I'm willing to talk to anybody about it. And one of the other mentors said, I can't believe in your area. He said, how many of these different strip till machines and interseeders and things like that got going? And I said, well, it started small, but it keeps snowballing. And that's what it takes. It takes a few.
Right.
And I know you have, I believe, Practical Farmers of Iowa has done a lot of research on it and has that. And it's changing, but it changes slow. The big
A little too slow. We've only got 4% of Iowa cropland is currently in cover crops. And our nutrient reduction strategy says we need to get to 50%. So we're not getting there very fast. And we need more farmers looking over the fence at you, Jerry, and the other farmers. And so we need people to spread the word on this sort of thing on cover crops and on no-till and strip-till and that sort of thing. But you also have to remember that farming is a business and farmers need to make money. And most farmers have lost money for 5 years. And so I think they might be motivated to take a look at maybe doing things differently. And hopefully the word is going to start getting around that by putting less inputs into your land and getting a higher yield, you should be able to make more money. So one of the reasons that the Farmers Union, we are actually going to continue a similar series as we're doing this evening. We're going to have 4 webinars on regenerative agriculture starting in April. We're going to have Francis Tickey on April 16th doing an overview of regenerative agriculture. And Francis Tickey uses almost every type of regenerative agriculture and organic practice that you can think of. And he crimps his cover crops, Jerry, instead of burning them down. And so he rolls them and crimps them. And then on Wednesday, April 29th, we're going to do Ray Gasser, who's the former head of the National Soybean Association and the Iowa Soybean Association, is going to talk to us about, we're going to have a whole webinar on no-till and cover crops. And then on May 14th, we're going to do diversification with John Gilbert, who's a board member for the Farmers Union. And on May 28th, we're going to do integration of livestock back on pasture with Seth Watkins. So you can find all the information here pretty soon on the Iowa Farmers Union website or our Facebook page. But this is that answered a question that somebody said, why don't we do more of these? And I think that you'll see a lot more of these. One reason is because we can't get out into the community because of COVID-19. So it's forced us to go online to do these things. And one of the things I want to thank Environment Iowa for inviting us to be part of this evening.
I would like to get back
Thank you
to,
so much.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to get back to that question by Molly Reagan from the farmers market in the Quad Cities. I agree with you completely, Molly. We do need more people growing food. I do think there will be a shortage, and I've been saying for years, but it'll become more obvious any day now, that setting aside some portion of land in Iowa to grow table food will lend itself to food security and national security. As our corn and bean farmers continue to struggle, as they suffer under the weight of international policy that is well out of their control with things like tariffs, as we import nearly 90% of our food to Iowa and export almost everything we grow, either as ethanol or in the pork that we're feeding, we have to start seeing the sense in growing fruits and vegetables here in Iowa again. And the farmers, the first thing they will say is there's no market for that. And that's because we've allowed that market to erode over the last 50 years. I used to get glib and just say the last time I checked, people hadn't stopped eating. But I understand that the farmers are saying there's no way to throw that on a truck and get it off my farm and get paid for it. Well, we need to keep rebuilding those systems so that we have the security we need. Here in Iowa, if we have the best soils in the world, why don't we use them to grow food that will nourish our own people? So thank you for your questions and your comments regarding that.
All right, guys, so we're at the time.